I'm reading from The Obesity Myth by Paul Campos. The largest ever epidemiological study, at the time, followed 1.8 million people for 10 years. The highest life expectancy was found among people with BMI figures between 26 and 28, all of whom were overweight according to the US government guidelines. Some might argue that cigarette smoking is skewing the results because it keeps you skinny but is very bad for your health. But one of the largest reviews found that among non-smoking white men, the lowest mortality rate was found among those with a BMI between 23 and 29, which means that a large majority of the men who lived the longest were overweight according to the government guidelines. It is true that obesity leads to high blood pressure, but it's been found that among those who suffer from hypertension, the mortality rate from the disease is 2 to 3 times lower among heavy individuals as compared to thin persons. And people who want to say that obesity is this huge crisis might want to recognize that deaths from heart disease have been plunging at precisely the same time that obesity has been skyrocketing. The death rate from heart disease and hypertension is less than half of what it was a generation ago. Over the same time frame, obesity rates have more than doubled. And in case you're wondering what overweight and obese looks like, this is Ashley Graham. She's a quote-unquote plus-size model, and she's on the verge of being obese. This is what they're trying to say is unhealthy. I did a sports science degree, and I was taught that a BMI of 25 is overweight, and a BMI of over 30 is obese, like it was dogma. So you might ask how I can now believe that this is totally wrong. First of all, I was taught no science to back up these claims. Secondly, I was also taught sports massage, quote-unquote. Sports massage does not exist. There is no evidence that massage can improve athletic performance. And yet I went through a whole paper and this was never brought up. Nobody questioned it. Everybody just pretended what we were doing was worthwhile because they wanted the prospect of getting work. I saw a sign advertising sports massage for $70 an hour just the other day. Even though sports massage is painful and has no benefits, it still exists because there is a market for it. Of course, all my tutors believed in the obesity myth because they would be pointless without it. My whole degree would be pointless without the obesity myth. It's not surprising that Western governments are spending so much money on the obesity epidemic. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars on the Y2K bug. I had a neighbor who got wealthy from quote-unquote fixing the Y2K bug. People are mostly going along with the obesity myth because it creates a market, in government, in academia, and in the private sector. And of course the media just wants a good story. There is some truth to the obesity myth. For example, Paul Erzenberger, PhD, points out that being 150 pounds or 68 kgs overweight has a risk association similar to that seen with light cigarette smoking. So the risk exists, it's just not a big deal. A lot of people are just trying to exploit a false crisis.